Hello and welcome to the Dailies. International media coverage of the Iran war has centered on escalation, economic shock and strategic uncertainty. Outlets highlighted continued strikes and retaliation across Israel and the Gulf, alongside concern over disruption to oil flows and the Strait of Hormuz. Reporting also stressed global consequences, including rising energy prices, market volatility, and political fallout in Washington and Europe. In America, the media has focused on the domestic fallout, especially rising gas prices, market volatility, and political risks for the White House ahead of midterms. Coverage also stressed strategic uncertainty, highlighting mixed messaging from Trump and debate over the war's costs, goals, and duration. The New York Times outlines how Americans are already experiencing the economic ripple effects of the Iran war. It highlights gasoline and diesel prices, warns also of knock-on increases in food and airline costs, and stresses broader risks to jobs, markets, and growth if the conflict continues. Drawing on economists and industry voices, the piece frames the impact as manageable for now, but potentially severe over time. Overall, it presents a clear, consumer-focused snapshot of early wartime economic pressure across the United States economy today. The Wall Street Journal reports growing pressure on Donald Trump to find an exit from the Iran war amid rising oil prices and political risk. The piece highlights tensions between Trump's public optimism about a quick end and advisors' private concerns about prolonged conflict and backlash before midterms. The report shows mixed messaging on strategy alongside economic worries and shifting public opinion. It portrays a White House balancing military momentum with mounting domestic and political constraints as the war continues. The Washington Post examines the scale and implications of early U.S. strikes on Iran, revealing that the Pentagon's estimate that $5.6 billion in munitions were used in just 2 days. It actually frames the figure as fueling congressional concern about depleted stocks of advanced weapons and also long-term readiness. The piece contrasts Pentagon's assurances with analysts' warnings about sustainability, shifting tactics, and global force trade-offs. Overall, it presents the campaign as costly, strategically complex, and politically controversial. The Washington Post also looks at who could be the winners in this conflict. Max Boot argues the Iran war benefits Russia and China more than the United States. He contends higher oil prices strengthen Moscow, while U.S. resources diverted to Iran weaken support for Ukraine and also distract from Beijing's rise. The article frames the conflict as indeed strategically misguided, warning it drains U.S. military capacity and focus. Overall, also, Boots presents the war as costly geopolitically, with long-term consequences outweighing any short-term military gains for Washington. The Economist focused on why MAGA backs Donald Trump's war for now, arguing that support rests largely on personal loyalty to Donald Trump and his preference for swift, forceful strikes consistent with America First. The analysis shows many supporters see the conflict as indeed limited and justified, despite isolationist rhetoric. However, the piece stresses that this backing is conditional. Dissent exists and could grow if the war drags on or requires ground troops. Ultimately, it frames the conflict as a defining test of MAGA loyalty. British media has focused on the UK's role and readiness, including debates over military deployments, alliance politics with Washington, and criticism of the government's cautious response. Coverage also stresses domestic impact, highlighting rising energy costs, market uncertainty, and political pressure tied to the cost of living crisis. The Times examines Britain's cautious military response as Keir Starmer's government signals it is unlikely to send an aircraft carrier to the Middle East while Emmanuel Macron deploys a major French naval force. It actually highlights the UK's slower approach, tensions with Donald Trump, and reliance on limited assets. Generally, the piece portrays Britain prioritizing NATO commitments and defensive operations while facing scrutiny over readiness and its role in the escalating Iran crisis. The Guardian argues Donald Trump delivered vague, contradictory messaging about the Iran war, declaring it partly won while insisting fighting would continue. The analysis portrays a press conference marked by unclear goals, shifting rhetoric, and market anxiety as oil prices rose. It actually highlights criticism from Democrats and confusion among allies over strategy. The piece presents the intervention as lacking a coherent endgame, raising doubts about leadership, clarity, and the war's trajectory. And we'll end with the Times of Israel, which explores the emerging gap between the US and Israel over the Iran war as oil prices rise and political pressures mount. The piece highlights weaker public support in the US versus strong backing in Israel and notes Washington's shorter-term priorities compared with Israel's security concerns. The piece argues the US may seek an earlier exit, while Israel wants Iran permanently weakened. In essence, it portrays diverging interests, with Trump holding significant leverage over Netanyahu despite growing domestic opposition. That's it from us today. Thanks for watching the Dailies, only on Al Arabiya English.